building blocks for sustainable leadership and governance in Africa. All of us will agree that the term leadership is one that is defined and understood differently. But I always find great wisdom in the definition of leadership to be found in the Bible. And this is, many of you who are readers of the Bible will find this particular verse very familiar. But he that is the greatest amongst you shall be your servant. And I find that very profound, because the Africa that we talk about, particularly the Africa that we talk about in the context of political leadership, which is what we tend to focus on, has demonstrated to us that leadership, as understood particularly by Africans in the political class, is not about servant leadership, but is about being a slave driver. And many of us, therefore, look at leadership in that context, with the consequence is that in almost all African countries, when you listen to people in their quiet and even in their muted circumstances, we all complain about leadership. We do not have this in our country because there is poor leadership. There is a conflict in this country because there is poor leadership. And if you look at the continent of Africa today, there is no shortage of examples of what one can describe as manifestations of poor leadership. You find countries which have resources like others in Africa, but if you look at the African country and compare them with other countries, we are truly underperforming. And if you look at the manner in which we pass the baton of leadership in many African countries, many of them are troubled and are the cause and source of chaos and disorganization. With the consequence that many in the African continent today wonder whether the men and women whom we refer to as leaders are truly leaders or misleaders. I remember as early as 1983, writing about his own country, Nigeria, Chinua Achebe, in a little book called The Trouble with Nigeria, which could very well be the trouble with Africa, said, the problem of Nigeria is simply and squarely a problem of leadership at all levels. And that can be said of many African countries with few exceptions, begging the foundational question, what is leadership? And who is a leader? And what is expected of a leader? And what has leadership to do with governance? What are the boxes that a good leader must tick in order to be counted as such? And we are not saying that there are no leaders in Africa. There are. If we allow ourselves to go a little into history and we look at pre-colonial Africa and look at the manner in which leadership was understood, we will have our traditional leadership systems. They had their problems and still had their problems, and even the ones that have survived still had their problems. But there is a sense in which the level of acceptance of leadership at whatever level was understood and based on customs and tradition. But today, you have a conversation with the Zulu of South Africa. From a modern standpoint, we may have problems with certain aspects of what constitutes their leadership at different levels. But there is a general acceptance that this is the manner in which we wanted to conduct our affairs. Whether one was a leader at the village level, whether one was a leader at the level of conducting rituals, whether one was a leader at the level of governing over the people generally, there were general principles which were understood, and issues of succession may have been troubled, but they were clearly defined. The same may be said of if you go to Uganda, the Baganda or the Bunyoro Kitara, or amongst the Yoruba, or amongst the Akan peoples. But today, when we have a conversation around leadership because of the experience we had with the colonialists and because of the nature of the post-colonial African state, we cannot escape but define leadership from sometimes a very Eurocentric standpoint. And I'm using the word Eurocentric in the knowledge that there are men and women who are here from different countries and from different traditions. Should not be lost on you that even the language that I'm using is foreign. I'm not using Yoruba, I'm not using Igbo or Luo or Kamba. I'm using a foreign language. And when one is using a foreign language, even the definition of terms is sometimes drowned in the foreignness of that language. Be that as it may, what is leadership? From where I sit, leadership is service, and leadership is a burden and trusteeship that is given to one by society, not simply because he's better than everybody else, but because he or she has been identified to have qualities which can be put to the general good. I believe one of the best definitions of leadership that I've come across is to be found in Carter G. Woodson's book, Miseducation of the Negro. And Carter G. Woodson, without defining, describes is not like the relationship between a horse and the rider, but that it is a symbiotic relationship where one agrees to surrender his or her interest to the extent that is necessary for the general good of the society, so that those who are chosen to be trustees will exercise powers whose general agenda and whose driving force is to ensure that there is harmony in the society, harmony that allows people to thrive, harmony that allows people to innovate, harmony that allows people to fulfill their personal ambitions, but in the knowledge that they are not apart from the society, but they are of the society. And I thought and still think that that is very profound, because it then tells us that whichever position you hold, that position requires of you that you always think of the general good. I remember as a young man watching a movie called Gandhi, and it is about the life of India's Mohandas Gandhi, otherwise known as the Mahatma. And I remember an incident in that movie where the Mahatma had just built his ashram. And in the ashram, there has been a timetable created indicating who is to clean the toilet on a daily basis. And on the day that I'm referring to, his wife, Kastuba, is the one who has been rostered to clean the toilet. When the Mahatma comes back, he discovers that the toilet has not been cleaned. And he is angry with the wife. And he tells the wife, why, or asks the wife, why did you not clean the toilet? And the wife says, but I'm your wife. And he says, all the more reason why you should have cleaned the toilet. He becomes almost violent and then stops. And the wife also realizes the mistake that she had made, had said, I'll clean the toilet. But the Mahatma says, you either clean the toilet with joy or not at all. Later, when he was interviewed about that incident, he said that in the scheme of things in the ashram, perhaps one of the most important people was the toilet cleaner, because the toilet cleaner is a leader in that very field. How many of us ever think that a toilet cleaner is a leader? We don't. In fact, we think that a toilet cleaner is the lowest or the lowest in the rung of things or people in the society. Yet you and me, when we go into public toilets, we expect to find clean toilets. Who is it that we expect to ensure that they are clean. And when we go to use the toilet, some of us don't even use it responsibly. We assume that somebody will take care of it. Leadership is about responsibility, and it is responsibility at all levels. Leadership is a chain which is strongest at the weakest point. If you look at leadership in any institution, the toilet cleaner is a leader. The messenger is a leader. The typist is a leader. The CEO and those who are serving under him are leaders. The board of directors are leaders. And when we say that the CEO is a successful leader, we are saying so because his or her leadership has been enabled by those who are part of the chain. Just this morning, I'm reading an article about the CEO of the Ethiopian airline, and he's being described as a legend. And I agree that he has done some useful work. But has he done it alone? Ethiopian Airline is easily the best airline in the continent of Africa in terms of the way that it orders our services. But we are quick to identify those who are the visible individuals in positions of leadership as the ones who are the leaders. In other words, when we see the CEO, we almost assume that he is a Moses-like figure with a rod and staff in his hand, parting red seas and summoning manna and quail from heaven and causing pillars of fire to stand and ensuring that there is water that is produced when rocks are hit. But we forget that under him, there are people who are enabling things to happen seamlessly. There are those who repair the aircraft. We never think about the engineers when we are flying. There are those who prepare the food which we consume very gleefully. We complain, but we don't think that there is a kitchen and a procurement process that ensures that that food is not only palatable, but is good and we are not poisoned. We don't care about who have supplied the spare parts, but all this is about leadership. And the point that I'm making, therefore, is that leadership is a cooperative kind of engagement, and it is the cooperative nature of the leadership which defines and creates a team. And at one time, and I'm fair to my fellow African, somebody told me that one of the reasons why African teams will never win the World Cup, at least in the foreseeable future, the World Cup to mean the Football World Cup, the South Africans will claim that they won the Rugby Cup. That is another debate. But he told me that the problem with many African teams that he has watched in the World Cup is that they are not champion teams. They are teams of champions. And I asked, what is the difference? Before I understood, he said, a team of champions is a team that is composed of many individuals, each of whom have amazing talent, but they don't play for the general good. Each one of them is playing for glory. And he told me, I want you to look very carefully at how African teams celebrate when they score goals. You'll find that the scorer of the goal invariably is somebody who is playing outside of the continent of Africa. He's playing in Spain or in Italy or in England. And when he scores the goal, he runs to the corner alone. And when he's celebrating him from his coach, who is in England. And therefore, to him, the team is not the greatest thing. It's not that he or she is playing for Ghana or La Côte d'Ivoire or Zimbabwe or South Africa. He is a champion. And he wants of him to be said of him at the end that he was the star. But when you look at South African teams, when they are playing African or European teams and South American teams, when they are playing, when they celebrate, they come together and celebrate for the team. And he told me, a team of champions will never realize its potential, but a champion team will always realize its potential. All leadership must have champion teams, not teams of champions. And you who are involved in very many engagements as leaders, you will have discovered that if you have an organization where the leader is a leader who is a slave driver, where the leader does not delegate, where the leader knows it all, where the leader thinks is God's gift to the organization, the performance of those organizations when you compare to others, where everybody thinks they are working for the entire organization, the difference is as big as the day, as obvious as day and night. And the concept of Ubuntu, which we are now trying to revive in very many African discourses, defines, in my view, what I think leadership is all about. Leadership is about working for the general good. I am because you are. You are a leader, and you are only a leader because there are people to be led. If there are no people to be led, then you cannot be a leader. They are only a servant because they are people to be served. And I think it is the Chinese Lao Tzu who said that a good leader leads from behind, and he or she is capable of identifying what is in the general good. In my mother tongue, there is something that we say about a leader, that the leader is the one whom the thorns scratch. He is the one whom the thorns scratch because he's the one who takes the risks. He is the one who has a larger vision of issues. He has both a bird's eye view of the issues, and he also has an earthworm's views of the issues. But he or she is so humble as to appreciate that he or she has no monopoly of knowledge and wisdom. And he or she, therefore, is capable of being a good listener and receiving wisdom from even those whom are not thought wise. A good leader, therefore, is one who is humble. He or she has integrity. He or she has a vision. He or she is capable of listening. He or she is capable of reflection. He or she only does that which is in the general good. He or she is also a mentor because he knows that his or her success is about sustaining the institution. And he or she does not undermine those who are serving under him. He or she thinks of the days after he or she is gone and is no longer part of the institution. He is head of the institution, but also one who wants to build the institution. And therefore, when we talk about governance, a good leader creates an environment where people thrive, where people's potential manifest themselves in their full splendor. He or she does not suffocate people. He or she encourages people, but he or she also holds people on a short leash to ensure that they are working for the general good. A good leader is a mentor because he prepares the next generation. And in many African societies, this was quite manifest, that you always had people who are being prepared at different levels. So one generation is being prepared to take over from another generation. When we were with TK in Malawi, I like this saying which was put across by President Chakwera, and is a Chewa saying that more important to us than our children are our children's children. That is how leadership thinks. More important to us than our children are our children's children. In other words, whatever a leader is doing, and this is the sustainability aspect of governance, they are thinking not about this generation, not about the succeeding generation, but generations beyond that. And I think that if you look at the holy books, the Bible itself says that you think of the fourth and the fifth generation. And when you are thinking about the fourth and the fifth generation, you are therefore laying a foundation stone. A good leader is a leader who builds firm foundations in the knowledge that that foundation will support future generations. A good leader is one, therefore, as I continue to talk about the subject of mentorship, produces men and women who will surpass him. And this is what gives meaning to the leaders, this famous statement that there is no greater recompense for a leader than to produce others who surpass him. I remember listening to a statement from Tanzania's Julius Kambarage Nyerere, and this is what he said, that when you see anybody, particularly in the political arena, who has this great desire and this great appetite from occupying a position of power, you must avoid that individual like you avoid a leper. Because he said, leadership is service. Leadership is a burden. He or she who is a leader does not and cannot afford to sleep for too long, because he or she is always thinking about how to improve the institution. The burden that he or she holds is about the affairs of other people. How can he possibly sleep? How can he possibly ignore the details of his or organization? And he said, there is a difference between occupying a position of leadership and being a leader. And he said, the tragedy of Africa is that we have too many individuals who are like nails without heads. Once you embed them into wood, there is no method of removing them, and they only make the environment toxic. And he said, a good leader must be like a nail with a head, so that when he or she does not perform, we have a way of removing him or her. And I thought that that was very incisive, particularly when you look at the political leadership in Africa today. There are those who have occupied positions of leadership, but they don't offer any leadership at all. And I remember once again with Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere talking to him in 1994 when I was serving internship at his foundation. And at that time, the whole idea, he had retired from active politics. And he told me, young man, you know, when I wanted to leave leadership in Tanzania, there are many people who said, don't leave. You leave us orphaned. And I told them that when people say you are doing great things and you have had the opportunity to serve, that is the time to leave. A good leader must prepare others and must know when to leave. And he said, when I'm leaving, I'll not be stepping down in the first few years, I'll step aside. And he said, let me explain to you what I mean by stepping aside. I will leave the main leadership position which I occupied as the president of Tanzania, but I'll remain the chairman of the party, because I want to ensure that I'm close enough to the person who has taken over from me, yet near enough to tell him to avoid the landmines which I stepped on. And once I've stepped aside and I know and believe that my successor is now on a firm grip, then I will step down. And when I step down, I'll now be an ordinary citizen, and I will support my leader because I'm a patriot who will point out when the leader is right and wrong, but I'll do it in a manner that will open his eyes, not inflame his anger. And he said, a good leader must therefore be one who is capable of ensuring that his successor succeed, because the true test of a leader is when his successor succeeds. So in a nutshell, when we are talking about leadership, I want to go back to what I started with, to be found, I believe, in the Bible, in the book of Matthew, chapter 23, verse 11. But he that is greatest amongst you shall be your servant. Today we talk about servant leadership, but I think we merely play lip service or pay lip service when we talk about servant leadership. And this is very rampant in Africa. Rampant in the sense that because we have made politics the be all and end all of leadership in Africa, whenever we talk about leadership, we only think about leadership. But think about any country. Think, TK, in Mauritius, where you are. Think about the foundational leadership of Sir Siwu Sagur Ramgulam. And ask yourself, why is Mauritius today, a small country, doing as well as it is doing? What did Sir Siwu Sagur Ramgulam do after they regained their independence? Number one, he offered himself to serve the nation. Therefore, he was a servant leader. Number two, he had a vision for the nation. In other words, a leader is a servant with a vision. Number three, he had a strategy on how to put his vision into place. Number four, he had a succession plan. Number five, he identified institutions which had to be strengthened in order for the country to thrive. And he created useful networks to ensure that this particular country moves in the right direction. And lastly, he identified a niche for his country. And I think that those are very critical things, that even when you are in an organization, there must be something that you, all those things combine, but there must be something that we say, this is what you are known for. That is at the political arena. If you go into any arena, why is it, for example, that Ethiopian Airlines has succeeded where almost all African airlines have collapsed? Zimbabwe used to have an airline, it is no more. South Africa used to have an airline, is no more. La Côte d'Ivoire used to have an airline, which was national, is no more. Nigeria used to have an airline, which was national, is no more. Zambia used to have an airline, which is no more. But yet the same individuals, when they go out to run their private airlines, they succeed. Why? Why is it? What are the governance issues? Why is it that, for example, McDonald's has these outlets throughout the world, and when you are in the United States, which is the mother of McDonald's, you are almost able to see it replicated in South Africa? What is it? The person who founded McDonald's is no longer alive. What about Kentucky Fried Chicken? How is it that this particular organization has succeeded to spread its wings across the world? Why? These are the questions that we must talk about when we talk about leadership and its sustainability. Because sustainability is about moving from better to even to the best. And I'm concluding by saying, therefore, that until the day we in the continent of Africa are able to, number one, define leadership as service and servanthood, and as long as we in Africa are not able to understand that leadership is also context defined and environment enabled, we are going always to make mistakes. Remember, what works in China does not necessarily work in Zimbabwe with equal exuberance. What works in Japan does not necessarily work in Abidjan with equal exuberance. We must borrow from other civilizations and borrow from other peoples, but make sure that those things are customized in a manner and domesticated in a manner that they address our specific circumstances. Hence, my final statement that when all is said and done, there are two things that must define what we call leadership, apart from the ingredients that I talked about. Ubuntu, you are because I am, and servanthood and vision. That, to me, is what leadership is all about. And the building blocks, as I said them, honesty, integrity, humility, patience, vision. These are the building blocks. And lastly, sustainability is about mentorship, creating other generation. And lastly, I want to tell you in our foundation now, which is about leadership in the continent of Africa, we started very modestly. Number one, we'll turn 30 on the 24th day, on the 14th day of December 2024. And what we have tried to do in a very modest way, particularly because we are talking about the continent of Africa, is to tell young Africans that they are with it. Self-esteem is also a very important thing. You must have belief in yourself. Part of the African problem is that we have been beaten so much that many times we in the continent of Africa don't even believe that we have the ability to do things. So the first thing, as Marcus Garvey said in 1988, know who you are. Because once you know who you are and you believe that you can achieve, that is the beginning of self-realization, and that is the foundation of being a servant. In the foundation, one of the things that we do, if you ask me, what do you do? I say we mentor people. How do you mentor people? We identify young Africans, and sometimes they come to us and I tell them, we don't want to change you. We are not like some of our parents who, because they fail to be doctors, now my son or daughter must be a doctor. Or because they fail to be engineers, now you want to fulfill your ambition through your daughter. You want to ensure that your daughter is the engineer or the lawyer. And yet your daughter has no interest in your law, no interest in your medicine, no interest in your engineering. He or she has an interest in other areas. I tell young people, you want to be in agriculture? I'll link you. I'll link you with somebody who is in agriculture, link you to Norma Mliswa, I'll link you to Betty Ako, who is in Nigeria. You want to be in the cosmetic arena? I'll link you with so-and-so. You want to be in technology? I'll link you with so-and-so. And I want you to watch how they do things. Not that you may be like them, but you may learn from them. And I'm very happy to report some of our iconic young men, some of them, some two young men who are from the Gambia, who are in the cosmetic arena. They have now outlets in Gambia, one in Dhaka, and 2 weeks ago they opened one in Nigeria, employing young people. The other is to be found in Monrovia in Liberia, who are now running cyber cafes. One in Tanzania, who is now become the leading icons for the promotion of Kiswahili language. And all these things tell me that if you do these things deliberately, you will discover that there is no shortage of young men and women. And I think it is in the Bible that somebody called Simon said, now I can die in peace. I may not be quoting it correctly, but when he saw Christ, he said, now it is done. Because I can see that a new message which gives meaning to my message is on the table. How many of us know when it is time to leave? The Baganda have a saying which I repeat very often. No matter how good an answer, you must know when to leave. And you must leave when people are singing your loudest songs. That is what leadership is all about. Is like a relay race. You run your leg and you pass over the baton. And remember that in a relay race, if any one person drops the baton, it doesn't matter how well the three run. The action of the one destroys all. And our foundation says we are running a relay race without an end. Thank you very much.